Belgravia, London. The crystal chandelier shook when Victoria Ashford, pharmaceutical heiress worth £6 billion, screamed at the servant who dared speak to her twin daughters. But when James Mitchell removed his butler's gloves and loosened his tie, revealing scars across his neck, he spoke words that froze the billionaire's blood. He was the husband she'd ordered killed 8 years ago, returned to reclaim his daughters. The 9-year-old twins stared, recognizing the voice from their dreams. Within 24 hours, the Ashford empire would crumble, built as it was on the blood of a man who'd survived assassination to return stronger. This is the story of the coldest revenge ever served, of a father who crawled from hell to save what was his. The Ashford mansion in Belgravia breathed money and menace in equal measure. Every morning at precisely 11, Victoria Ashford sipped her third gin of the day, while surveying her domain like a queen surveying subjects. The rules were carved in marble as firmly as the floors. No staff spoke to the twins Charlotte and Olivia. No one touched them. No one existed for them except as silent shadows. James Mitchell had started working at the mansion 3 weeks prior, perfect in the anonymity of his pressed black uniform. Nobody suspected that beneath the servant's facade hid a former Royal Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan, nor that the hands polishing silver had once performed emergency surgery in war zones. Least of all that this silent man was the ghost haunting Victoria Ashford's nightmares for 8 years. That Tuesday morning in November, fate set the wheels of vengeance in motion. The twins sat on the gold-embroidered sofa in the drawing room, identical in their Cheltenham ladies' college uniforms, when James passed through dusting. Olivia, the braver of the two, asked him for water, an innocent gesture that unleashed hell. Victoria materialized from her study like a wounded predator. Her scream made the 19th-century chandelier crystals vibrate as she crossed the room with steps promising violence. She was still beautiful at 46, but the beauty was corroded by gin, cocaine, and the weight of unconfessed crimes. Her blue eyes, once captivating enough to seduce Parliament members, now burned with paranoia and rage. The scene that followed would be carved into the twins' memory forever. Their mother screaming, face purple with rage, neck veins bulging. The servant remaining motionless, calm as a lake surface hiding deadly currents. And then, the moment everything changed. James slowly removed his white gloves, letting them drop to the Persian carpet. He loosened his tie, revealing the scar across his throat, where the garrote had almost succeeded 8 years ago. He turned to her with the grace that even years of hiding hadn't erased. His gray eyes met her blue ones, and time stopped. The Waterford crystal tumbler Victoria clutched fell, shattering into 1,000 shards that reflected light like dying stars. Her face went from rage red to corpse white in a heartbeat. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming a name she hadn't spoken in 8 years. James. The girls watched paralyzed as this man seemed to step straight from their recurring dreams. That voice humming lullabies never heard, that scent of sandalwood pervading their nights, that blurred face appearing whenever they closed their eyes. Charlotte grabbed Olivia's hand in a grip, speaking of impossible recognition. James spoke with controlled voice, hiding 8 years of preparation. He revealed how he'd survived the assassination attempt, how the body identified at his funeral was a homeless veteran who died the same night, how he'd spent 18 months in a Scottish hospital under a false name, his throat reconstructed, but his will intact, how he'd orchestrated the most elaborate revenge in British criminal history. Victoria staggered backward as James pulled out a phone from his uniform pocket. On the screen, video after video of arrests that morning. Her head of security, her accountant, her corrupt solicitor. Every pillar of her criminal empire collapsed in perfect synchronization. The cook preparing her meals for 2 years, James's sister, the gardener, his brother, the twins' driver, an undercover detective. The most devastating revelation came when James showed the knife. Not to use it, but to display it. The same weapon Victoria's hired killer had used, still with her fingerprints preserved in wax. Then came the audio recording, Victoria's voice 8 years prior, planning the perfect murder, PTSD as cover. The £70 million life insurance payout. The twins rose slowly from the sofa, moved by primordial instinct toward this man claiming to be their father. Their gray eyes, identical to James's, sought confirmation the heart already knew. Olivia timidly showed a silver compass, found years before by the Thames. James recognized it immediately. It had fallen during the struggle that terrible night. The intercom buzzed, breaking the tension. On the monitor, a police squad led by the new incorruptible chief inspector. Victoria tried running to her study where she kept fake passports and cash, but her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the leather armchair as her world disintegrated. James revealed the final masterstroke. The power of attorney Victoria had made him sign before their wedding, claiming it was for medical decisions, was actually a post-dated property transfer. The Ashford empire was legally his from that moment. Victoria's lawyer, also infiltrated, had confirmed the document's legal validity. As officers handcuffed Victoria, the girls approached James. No words, just an embrace containing 8 years of absence and a lifetime of promises. Victoria was dragged away, screaming empty threats, her voice fading down the corridor like an echo of a nightmare finally ending. The mansion transformed into a crime scene within minutes. Investigators sealing Victoria's study, boxes of documents carried away as evidence, forensic photographers immortalizing every corner of the Golden Prison. But in the main drawing room, James finally sat with his daughters, the moment he'd dreamed of for nearly a decade. The twins studied him with the intensity of those trying to memorize every detail of a miracle. They'd grown beautiful, but with sadness in their eyes, making them seem older than their 9 years. James saw in them reflections of himself at their age, orphaned and alone, but also the strength that had allowed him to survive. Charlotte, always the more reflective one, broke the silence with a revelation that shattered James's heart. Victoria had told them their father died because he couldn't handle twins, that the pressure drove him to suicide. A cruel lie that had poisoned their childhood, making them feel guilty for existing. James knelt before them, taking those small hands in his scarred ones. The wounds from the garrote burned beneath his collar as he told the truth. How he'd loved every moment of Victoria's pregnancy, every kick promising new life. How that terrible night he'd fought with a lion's strength, not for himself, but to return to them. Olivia showed the compass again, telling how she'd found it during a visit to the Thames that Victoria had organized for the twins' 5th birthday, a macabre pilgrimage to their father's supposed death site. But Olivia had always known it was a lie. The compass spoke to her at night, whispering truths nobody wanted to hear. James then revealed the existence of Margaret, his mother, alive and well on a Yorkshire farm. The girls' eyes widened. Victoria had always said they were alone in the world, no family beyond her. Another bar of the emotional prison she'd locked them in. The Yorkshire house had been James's refuge these last 2 years, the headquarters from which he'd orchestrated Victoria's downfall. Margaret, 73 but strong as an oak, had prepared 2 rooms for granddaughters she'd never been allowed to meet, overlooking the moors with the scent of fresh-baked bread. James opened the safe, hidden behind a constable painting. The combination was the twins' birth date, revealing documents and a blue velvet box. Inside, 2 identical gold lockets with the girls' names engraved. He'd bought them the day of their birth and hidden them before that fatal night. The girls put them on with religious reverence, like talismans, finally reconnecting them to their true story. The lawyer arrived that afternoon with more revelations. Victoria had accumulated crimes upon crimes, tax evasion in the hundreds of millions, bribing public officials, even attempted murder of an MP opposing her pharmaceutical monopolies. But the most shocking discovery was Edward's existence. A 12-year-old son Victoria had with a Swiss banker, now dead from overdose. James made a decision that stunned even the lawyer. The boy was innocent, and now motherless with his father headed to prison. He could live with them if the twins agreed. He shouldn't pay for his mother's sins. Charlotte and Olivia consulted with those telepathic looks of twins, then nodded. They'd known emotional abandonment. They wouldn't inflict it on another child. That evening, while preparing to leave for Yorkshire, James found the girls in their room. They were burning all the expensive clothes Victoria had bought, the perfect doll uniforms she'd forced them to wear. It was a purification ritual, liberation from 8 years of golden prison. James watched as flames devoured silk and cashmere. He didn't intervene. He understood the need to destroy symbols of their captivity. When the last dress became ash, the girls turned to him with eyes that for the first time sparkled with hope instead of sadness. The night journey to Yorkshire was silent, but not uncomfortable. The twins slept leaning against each other in the back seat, while James drove through sleeping England. Detective Morrison, who'd revealed himself as the real name of the fake driver, followed in another car for security. He'd protected the girls for 4 years undercover, becoming more of a father than Victoria had ever been a mother. Dawn painted the Yorkshire moors pink when they arrived at the farm. An ancient stone house surrounded by centuries-old oaks, standing like guardians, sheep dotting the hills, and wild heather scent permeating the air. Margaret waited on the porch, straight despite her 73 years, hands clasped to contain emotion. The meeting between grandmother and granddaughters was suspended grace. Margaret knelt to their height, studying faces that were mirrors of the past. She saw her son as a child in those gray eyes, but also something unique, strong, forged by early survival. She embraced them with the delicacy of handling precious crystal, but also the firmness of never letting go again. The house was the opposite of the London mansion. Simple, warm, lived in. The rooms prepared for the girls had wrought iron beds with handmade quilts, overflowing bookshelves, windows framing postcard landscapes. The transformation over following weeks was miraculous. Charlotte devoured books in the dusty library. Olivia followed the local vet on rounds, both blooming like plants after drought. Edward arrived after 2 weeks from Swiss foster care. 12 years old, Victoria's blue eyes without the cruelty, terrified of rejection. But the twins welcomed him with the gentleness of those who know rejection's bitter taste. James treated him as a son. Margaret learned his favorite dishes, and slowly the brilliant but wounded boy found his place. During dinner under the stars, James revealed the Ashford Empire's fate, half to domestic violence victims, a quarter for the Children's Education Trust, the rest to transform the London mansion into a shelter. Blood money becoming salvation. When the lawyer called saying Victoria wanted to plea bargain for monthly visits, the twins refused. Not ready. Perhaps never. First, they needed to learn what family without poison meant. The trial became the year's media event. The Old Bailey overflowed, while James sat in the front row with the 3 children.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
His dark suit hiding the scars. Victoria appeared destroyed. 20 years aged in 20 days. Prison uniform replacing Chanel. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings of planned murder, documents of systemic corruption, and devastating security footage showing everything. Victoria's associate strangling James by the Thames, the body thrown in the river, James crawling out a mile downstream. The twins closed their eyes, but James made them watch. They needed to see what greed does to the human soul. James's testimony lasted 3 hours of raw truth. The marriage prison, violence disguised as love, faking death to survive, the pain of leaving 6-month-old babies. The courtroom held its breath. Victoria attempted pathetic defenses, but collapsed when her own barrister, disgusted, presented more evidence. Sentence: life plus 30 years. She'd die in prison. As they led her away, she sought the children's eyes. Olivia responded that forgiveness is earned, not demanded. Edward looked away. Charlotte remained silent. Outside, to journalists, James said only, "Justice is done. Now healing." The return to Yorkshire was celebration. Neighbors with laden tables, lanterns in the oaks. The twins danced for the first time. Edward played hidden guitar. The Ashford mansion became Haven House, immediately saving the Eastern European woman whose body had been mistaken for James's. The children flourished. Charlotte won literary prizes. Olivia healed traumatized animals. Edward created the app revolutionizing victim assistance. 5 years passed like pages in a book, finally telling a happy story. The farm had become a small empire of good. Besides the main house, 3 neighboring cottages were restored to shelter struggling families. The fields produced organic wool sold to finance the London centre. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem of rebirth. Charlotte, now 14, had published her first novel. The story of a girl discovering everything she believed was lies had touched deep chords in the British public. With proceeds, she'd funded scholarships for violence victims. Writing had become her personal revenge against years of imposed silence. Olivia, also 14, studied veterinary medicine with private tutors, already accepted into a Cambridge Young Talent program, but her true calling was healing wounded souls, animal or human. She had a gift for reaching those who'd closed themselves to the world, perhaps because she knew that darkness. Edward, 17, had become the family's unexpected pride. His computing genius had created not just the successful app, but an entire online support platform connecting survivors worldwide. Google had offered to buy the code for astronomical sums, but he'd refused. "Some projects are priceless," he'd said with maturity that amazed everyone. James had found balance he'd never thought possible. He directed the centers efficiently, but without the military coldness of before. He'd learned true strength lies in shared vulnerability, in showing one's scars to give hope to those thinking wounds never heal. And he'd found love, unexpected and sweet. Detective Morrison, Andrew by name, had continued protecting the family even after the undercover operation ended. He'd become a constant presence, the man fixing the roof, teaching Edward to drive, dancing with Margaret at village celebrations. A slow, respectful courtship that had blossomed into a simple wedding the previous summer. Margaret, now 78, was the undisputed matriarch. She cooked for 50 people every Sunday when all the center's guests who wanted came to the farm. Her gnarled hands kneaded bread at dawn, her still sharp eyes spotted who needed a kind word or extra hug. She was the universal grandmother everyone wished they'd had. One summer evening, while dining under the stars with other center guests, a letter arrived from Victoria, from prison. She wrote every year for the twins' birthday, but they'd never opened the envelopes. This time, Charlotte decided she was ready. She read silently, then aloud for all. Victoria told of finding faith in prison, not the comfortable kind of the rich, but the desperate kind of those with nothing left. She worked in the prison library, teaching illiterate inmates to read. She wasn't asking forgiveness. She knew she didn't deserve it, but wanted them to know the monster she'd been was dying, cell by cell, replaced by something that, perhaps, resembled a human being. The silence following the reading was long but not hostile. Edward spoke first. He proposed responding, not with forgiveness, but with updates, telling Victoria about Goodborn from her evil, lives saved with her dirty money, not to console her, but to show what could have been if she hadn't been blinded by greed. James wrote the response that night, signed by all 3 children. It told of Charlotte's successes, Olivia's calling, Edward's genius, Of 32 women saved that year, 48 children who'd found shelter. There was no forgiveness, but neither was there hate. Just the cold accounting of a wasted life against 3 saved lives. 10 years after Victoria's arrest, the world James had created was unrecognizable from the ashes it had risen from. Haven House had locations in 6 British cities, saving over 300 people yearly. It had become a model studied across Europe, an example of how evil can be alchemically transformed into good. Charlotte, 24, had become a barrister specializing in women's rights. Her chambers worked pro bono for those who couldn't afford justice. She'd won impossible cases, created legal precedents, changed laws, but she remained a writer at heart, publishing novels exploring the dark side of perfect families. Olivia, also 24, ran a mobile veterinary clinic touring deprived areas offering free care. But her real talent was recognizing in abused animals the same trauma she saw in humans, and healing both. She'd developed a pet therapy protocol adopted in pediatric hospitals across Britain. Edward, 27, had become a tech legend. His ethical company employed only disadvantaged people, ex-convicts, violence victims, refugees. It invoiced millions, but he still lived at the farm, in a renovated outbuilding. Money was just a tool, he repeated, not an end. James, now 55, had silver-streaked hair but still gray eyes. Marriage to Andrew had brought stability and sweetness to his life. They'd adopted 2 more children, brothers saved from an abusive situation, completing a family that redefined the very idea of extended family. Margaret, 82, was still the backbone. Slower in movement, but still sharp of mind, she continued cooking for the large Sunday gatherings. She'd become a great-grandmother when Charlotte had a daughter, Aurora, conceived through IVF because Charlotte didn't trust men enough to love them, but wanted to be a mother. It was in this context of full life that news arrived. Victoria was dead. Heart attack in her sleep. No suffering. She'd left a letter and a box the prison governor delivered personally. In the letter, last wishes, to be cremated, and ashes scattered in the Thames, where she'd tried to kill James, as a final act of contrition. The box contained a surprise nobody expected. Hundreds of drawings. Victoria had spent her last years obsessively sketching the children from every photo she could find in newspapers. Charlotte winning the literary prize, Olivia graduating, Edward receiving honors. Each drawing signed, "The Mother I Never Was." The family gathered to decide. There was no moral obligation to fulfill an attempted murderer's wishes. But little Aurora, 5 years of concentrated wisdom, gave the answer. The bad mummy was dead, she said, but ashes were just dust. If throwing them in the river could clean the dirty water from before, why not? The ceremony was private, on Westminster Bridge at sunset, with London glowing golden below. James scattered the ashes while the children watched. No tears, just strange peace. The river that was supposed to take James away now carried away the last remains of the woman who'd tried to destroy him. The circle closed. Andrew put an arm around James as they watched the water flow. 30 years of history sliding away toward the sea. Margaret, leaning on her cane but still proud, murmured a prayer more for the living than the dead. The children, no longer children, embraced in a hug that included everyone, even Edward, who'd always feared being the outsider. The return to Yorkshire was silent, but not sad. That evening, they dined in the large refectory with all the center's guests. Survival stories intertwined, laughter born from shared and overcome pain. James looked at this impossible family built from rubble and understood this was true revenge. Living well, loving hard, saving others. 20 years after that night, when he'd knocked on the door disguised as a servant, James Mitchell had become a national icon. Not sought, not wanted, but inevitable. His story was studied in universities, his model replicated in other nations. But for him, it remained simple. He'd transformed attempted annihilation into multiplication of love. One evening, a new family arrived at the center, a man with 3 children, fleeing an abusive wife, with nothing but the clothes they wore. James welcomed them personally, seeing himself 30 years prior. He led them to the prepared room, pointed to the phone to call whoever they wanted, promised they were safe. The man wept with relief, while the children timidly explored the space that would be home for as long as necessary. Before leaving, James said the words he said to all new arrivals. Here, flight ends, and rebirth begins. You're no longer victims, you're survivors. And survivors are the strongest of all. That night, as he fell asleep beside Andrew, with farm sounds filtering through the open window, James thought of the long journey from the Thames to the present. The strangulation scars still ached when weather changed, physical reminders of that night. But they were no longer wounds. They were medals. Victoria Ashford's empire had become a kingdom of hope. The mansion of terror was a shelter of salvation. Blood-dirty money had become wings for those wanting to fly from hell. And James Mitchell, the servant who dared challenge the billionaire, had become living proof that sometimes, just sometimes, good wins over evil. The final image is of an ordinary morning at the farm. James making coffee at dawn, Charlotte writing at her laptop, Olivia treating a stray cat, Edward programming revolutionary code, Margaret kneading bread, Andrew fixing a window, Aurora playing in the courtyard. An impossible family made possible by the courage of a man who chose to live when it would have been easier to die. And somewhere in London right now, a desperate woman is dialing Haven House's number. She doesn't know she's about to meet James Mitchell. She doesn't know her life is about to change. She only knows she can't do it alone anymore. The phone rings. James answers. The story begins again. Because some doors, once opened to save someone, never close again. They become portals of salvation for anyone with courage to knock. If you've come this far, you understand that true revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you, but building something magnificent from the ruins they left. Leave a like if you believe in the power of rebirth. Share this story with someone who needs to know you can survive hell and transform it into paradise. And remember, sometimes you have to pretend to be dead to learn what it truly means to live.